Disorder, Family, and Consumer Education Webinar Series brought to you by McLean Hospital. My name is Chris Palmer. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm the director of the Department of Postgraduate and Continuing Education here at McLean Hospital, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you. Today we're joined again by a family member of someone with borderline personality disorder, and she is here to talk about her experience in dealing with borderline personality disorder. She has run several family connections groups, which is a form of group therapy developed by the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder, so a shout out to them. And you'll probably hear more about those groups in our discussion today. Today's a follow-up to the webinar that she did several weeks ago, and we're really going to open it up for questions. We already have a lot of people who have pre-submitted questions and dilemmas today, and we'll get through as many questions, clinical dilemmas as we can. Before we get started, a few logistical announcements. In your lower right-hand corner, you'll see a Q&A box. If you do have a question today, or if you've got a case, or if you've got questions about the material or the answers that we're providing, feel free to type them in. If you've come to this webinar with a specific question in mind, feel free to type it in right now, and we'll put it in queue and try to get through as many of them as we can. In the lower left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a box with a lot of web links. The first one is a link to our web page, which includes all of our recorded webinars, including this one, the one presented by our presenter today, a family member's perspective. The next three are national resource links related to borderline personality disorder. One common question we get is, where can I find a clinician in my area? And those three links may be a good lead for you. And finally, these webinars are brought to you through a generous philanthropic gift by a family affected by borderline personality disorder. We would love to be able to continue these, but we rely on support from people like you if you're benefiting from this. And there's a link there to be able to support these webinars, and we hope you might consider doing that. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our welcome to the webcam, our speaker. She's asked to remain anonymous because she has a family member with borderline personality disorder who is pursuing her own life. And so I won't formally introduce her, but I welcome to the webinar our speaker today.
Good morning. We're going to go through ever so briefly what I talked about on my last webinar, but I encourage you to watch it if possible, just because we are truly just going to announce or just go through the points there, and you should see them. The reason I am going over them is for those of you who didn't watch it, just to understand before we get to the questions, it's very helpful to understand my perspective as a family member on this, is so that a lot of the ways that we're going to address the answers is coming from a place within ourselves versus how to change your loved one, which so many people who come to Family Connections, I'll talk about that in a second, that I'm a leader of that, and just the people that I come across in support groups, et cetera, they want to know, tell me exactly what to say and how to say it and how to handle the situation. But it's important to start within ourselves before we even address things with our loved ones. So let me just touch really quickly on the points that I made last time. I do wish to remain anonymous because but I will let you know that I am a mother, but because my child, and I won't say whether it's a son or a daughter or refer to them as he or she, I will just say they, is so that I can keep their life as private as possible. But I have taught Family Connections 9 times. I've also been a member of quite a number of support groups. I've also attended lots of conferences. So I know that I can speak from a variety of family members' perspectives. I also have a husband. I have another child. I have extended family members. So I feel like I'm a pretty good person to come across as a sibling, as a child of someone with BPD, as a romantic partner of someone with BPD. I've seen it all. So hopefully I can look at things from different perspectives. The first thing is to allow yourself to grieve and share it. Nobody wants to be in this situation with a loved one with BPD, and they do not want to have BPD. So the first thing is to understand that, you know, it is a very difficult situation. These aren't the lives we thought we would be leading. And so the first thing is it is okay to think that and feel that. But it's important to feel it in a way that it's not resenting the person with BPD for making your life like that. We need to make changes in ourselves, and that's the hugest part of this whole conversation, is that we cannot change our loved one with BPD. So unless we make different attitudes, change in attitudes in ourselves and come from a calm place, we cannot even deal with our loved one with BPD. The thing that made me really made a big change in my life was viewing mental illness as a medical illness. And in that aspect, it's really made me be more compassionate. If my child had diabetes or cancer or cerebral palsy or anything else, would I be this tough on them if they said that they were having a bad day or they needed adaptive changes? So that was really helpful to me to view that, and I hope that it's helpful to you. Emotional seizures is a term that I came up with, was that, again, looking at it as a medical perspective, that I look at it as the brain is just misfiring, and instead of the body going into a physical convulsion, their emotions just go into convulsions. You know, they're angry, they're spewing hateful words, they may even physically throw things, et cetera, and that if we can stay calm and look at it as their brain is misfiring versus taking it so personally, which is my next point. Try not to take things so personally. A lot of times it allows you to be compassionate and stay calm versus reacting emotionally as well. The next point is to get educated in any way that you can, whether you're watching the archived webinars on this website, or you are reading books, or you're on the internet. Anything that you can do to get yourself educated, again, will help you with those attitude changes and allowing yourself to stay calm. The one that I found most helpful when I was researching was National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder, and that is neabpd.org. is a quick reference to it. So you can go ahead, and they have the family guidelines, which is my next point. That I printed that off. It became my Bible. I read it. I sent the link to family members and friends so that they could understand, you know, what I was dealing with, and also how to help my loved one when they came in contact with them. But neabpd.org is also where you will find the link to get Family Connections, which is it's a 12-week course. It's taught over the phone. It's taught in person. But if you can somehow get into that group or find something in your area, whether it's Al-Anon or a religious support group, anything that you can do to get help and support is invaluable. The other way to get help and support is to also get therapy. I know a lot of people have a stigma about that just for themselves. They think that their loved one is the one with the issue, but I can tell you from personal experience, I got therapy. I just needed someone neutral to talk to. Often when I was upset and I'd be talking to my husband or friends, they would get judgmental about my loved one, and I didn't need that. I needed a neutral perspective, and that was invaluable. It also allowed me to be in a better place to deal with my loved one. So at a minimum, be selfish. And in that way, it sounds like an interesting point, but if you can do anything for yourself to boost your own self-confidence and to be in a better place, it could be, if you don't have the money to do something else, you can take a walk, you can take a long bath, you can sit out in your yard, garden, anything that you take time for yourself to do something for yourself. If you have the money, go for a massage, go to a play or a movie or a sporting event, anything that you can do to do something for yourself so that you don't feel so drained in dealing with your loved one. Find a support group and be with others who are struggling, and that is in itself invaluable. I think that we feel so alone and isolated as family members that it's really important to talk with other people who have been through it. You may not be able to articulate how you're feeling, and then you hear someone else talk about it, and you can totally relate. And there's nothing as invaluable as having someone who's been through what you've been through to be there for you also. Read books. I read things on Buddhism. I read things on parenting. I read things on borderline personality disorder. anything that you can get your hands on, even if, some of them I didn't even finish, some of them were just, difficult to read, some of them were just invaluable and I read from cover to cover in a very short time. But every single book that I picked up some little tidbit that helped me, again, back to my previous point of changing my attitude and staying calm and getting compassionate. Take a DBT class or research the skills. I know this is often recommended for our loved ones, but DBT is something that is important for us as well. It's learning to be present. It's learning to use distraction. It's all of the skills that our loved ones need, but also we need it for ourselves to help them deal with things that they're dealing with. Try to accept that we are all doing the best that we can, and that is a cornerstone of DBT. And it's really, really hard to do. When you see your loved one raging or saying horrible things or hurting themselves or feeling suicidal, to think that they're doing the best that they can. But again, if you can adopt that, if you can really not just adopt it, but just truly absorb it, it is an important aspect to understand and to be compassionate. So your child cutting themselves is someone who may not be, who is holding back from killing themselves. If they're sleeping all day, they're just, trying to get through the day without hurting themselves. So a lot of those times, if you think, okay, this is the best that they can be doing at this time, again, it takes away some of that resentment towards things that are happening. And if you can try to accept that they're doing the best they can, often it helps you to be compassionate. Because without being compassionate, you can't even move on to the next stages of practicing forgiveness and accepting that BPD is hell. When we accept that BPD is hell, a lot of these things go back and forth. We can go ahead and be compassionate. BPD is hell for everybody. I say to my husband a lot, that, this really is difficult for us right now to deal with our loved one, but can you imagine being inside of their head? I can't even imagine what it must be like to have, to be so super sensitive, to be fully overwhelmed by things that everyone around them is dealing with in a normal way or something. It's really very isolating for them. It's hell, and it helps me to be compassionate, to understand that, and also back to accepting that this is the best that they can do at this moment. Be present is something, I feel in today's society it's overused and some people don't even understand what that means. But it truly means to be in that moment without thinking about the past, without worrying about the future, especially with BPD. So when my loved one says, hey, listen, I'm having a hard day, would you mind folding my laundry or making dinner tonight? And you think, oh my God, when is this going to stop? You're already worrying about the future, or, this is the 100th time I've made them dinner in the past, year, whatever it may be. You can't be compassionate and calm in that moment. But if you truly look at things in that moment and you think, geez, if I was having a bad day, I would want some help too. It helps you to be okay in that moment. And that's just one small example, but again, I'm just trying to get through the points quickly. Lose the judgment, and this is a huge one. And I think that we just want our loved ones to be sometimes the way they were before they fell apart. Sometimes you can't believe the choices that they're making or the people that they want to be with. But if we look at it from their perspective and we lose the judgment from our point of view and we think, well, geez, this is, the only people that they're able to be with at this time, or this is the only way that they're able to handle it at this time. Whatever you can do to lose the judgment goes back to helping you be compassionate and staying calm, etc. Learn to validate. And so the validation is the key to me, is what changed my life with my loved one. To validate is not to agree, it's just to see things from their perspective. So instead of saying when they didn't handle something well in their life, to say, I can't believe that you did that, but to look and see from their perspective, geez, that must have been really tough for you. I'm sorry it didn't go that, the way that you wanted it to, is just, you're not agreeing that they should have handled it the way that they did, but you're just understanding it from their perspective. And it's anything, there's books on validation, there's, again, back to going to therapy. Sometimes a therapist will help you look at things from a different way. Anything you can do to learn to validate will be invaluable. And stop fixing. And this is the hardest one because I think that it's a slow progression into taking over our loved ones' lives. And I think that we end up trying to, instead of becoming helicopter parents or helicopter loved ones or family members, we end up going in and becoming bulldozers. We're trying to get everything out of the way so that they can handle the situation. But what ends up happening is it ends up hurting them because you're not allowing them to make the mistakes and to learn so that they can become more independent. And instead, fixing it ends up creating a habit of us taking over, and then they just always end up being more depending on us. Pull back and find a balance, and that's, again, it's really hard to do. I'm guilty of stepping in and fixing, and I understand how hard it is, but with support from professionals, if you can get it, it can help you really to pull back and find a balance so that you're not feeling so overwhelmed, you're not feeling so resentful. The ways to do that, if you do not have a therapist or even therapy available in your area, is to sign up for a couple of groups if you can. NAMI's Family to Family is a great group. It's not for people with family members specifically with BPD. It's for all people with mental illness, all family members. But it is an educational group. I think it's several weeks long. I have not taken it, but Family to Family is one of the bases that Family Connections was based, or one of the groups that Family Connections was based out of. And that brings me to my next point, is Family Connections. And this is what really did change life for me for the better, because it is specifically for family members with BPD. You can find it on the bpd.org, neabpd.org, or in here it's a little bit longer, borderlinepersonality.com. They're just the same website. And there's a drop-down menu. It will say for families. You hit that, you drop down, and you can find out information about Family Connections and register for that. It is a 12-week course, and it is a progression of curriculum. So, the second class is based off the first, the third is based off the second. So we do, before you sign up, ask that you can commit to at least 10 of the classes so that you can keep up with the curriculum. So we're going to get into some common questions. They're actually not common questions, they're specific questions, but they were submitted. We're going to go through them in the order that they were submitted, to be fair. But the last couple things is just to be patient. Nothing is going to change immediately. It takes time. We may be in a better place than our loved one, even within our own families. I know my husband had a harder time making the adjustments that I did. He traveled, so he couldn't take Family Connections right away. So everybody may be in a different place, and so you may understand what's best for your loved one and the changes that they need to make, but they need to come up on it on their own. You can't force them. They're not going to accept the help that they need if it's forced upon them. So sometimes you just have to be patient. And what I would do is often just in a very compassionate, non-judgmental way, maybe plant seeds. Geez, I heard about this group, or there's this online DBT class that I saw. And they may roll their eyes, or they may get upset. But if you can say it, again, in a compassionate way, versus if you only took DBT or if you only did this, they're definitely not going to listen. So if you can, I say, plant a seed versus lecturing or telling them how to do it, it would be very helpful. Social media has been very helpful to me. I have searched on Facebook, and I know there's Twitter accounts and online blogs, et cetera, of people with BPD. That was very helpful to me because the people who do these things are very articulate. So your loved one may be not that articulate on how they're feeling, or maybe so angry that they're not able to express it in a certain way. But often when I read these blogs and Facebook pages, it helped me to understand my loved one in a better way. And there's also Facebook pages and blogs, et cetera, of family members too. So even if you don't have something in your area, social media and the internet can help. And my last, just point is don't give up if possible. It's really hard, and we're going to get into some really tough questions right now about how overwhelming it is. But anything that you can do to be patient, to be calm, to be compassionate. I know in my own life I thought it was so bleak. I never ever would have pictured the relationship with my loved one to be as good as it is now. And there are times when you will have to get out of the situation that you're in, but if possible, if you are able to stay in and be calm and take care of yourself, hopefully you will get a better relationship too. So we're going to go ahead and start, and Dr. Palmer is right here with me. He's not on camera because it's a little too hard to do it together, but I may bump a question to him, or he may go ahead and interject his professional opinion, which I value. So I think we're just going to go right away. So you can read these up on the slide, but I'm going to read them out loud just in case someone is listening in while they're at their desk, etc. And we combine these two because they're similar in the way that I'm going to address them. So the first person writes in, does any parent just get tired of the drama and bracing themselves for the constant mood changes? The future just seems so bleak. It is so hard to get her to take responsibility. And the next person wrote in, how do you get started improving your relationship when it feels like you live with an emotional vampire? From age 9 to current age 17, we are exhausted from the loop of emotion. I need you, I hate you, let me live my life, you don't show any love to me, you are too controlling. We have used every resource available to us. Our relationship is so damaged and we are in survival mode. We don't trust her and she doesn't trust us. We blame each other. We look forward to the day we live apart. She is not in therapy currently. She said the therapist was taking our side, so she refuses to go. And I have to tell you, I've been there, done this, both of these. Exhausted from the drama, bracing, you walk around. I personally don't like the term walking on eggshells. I think it doesn't make sense. I don't know anybody who can walk on eggshells, but I think of it as thin ice. You're kind of putting your foot out there a little bit, waiting to see if it's going to crack. You never know how to bring up something or talk about something. So I think the first thing, back to validation, is to validate ourselves. It sucks. It's really hard to live like this, and I absolutely understand how draining it can be. The term emotional vampire, it made me feel really sad to hear this term because I can relate. It is very draining. But I think I'm always going to try to go back to what we can do for ourselves. So we cannot address these issues without taking care of yourself first. So the first thing is to get help if you can. Talk to a therapist. Try to get yourself in a better place so that you can address these things with your loved one. I think that the I need you, I hate you, let me live my life, letting them take responsibility. So it's hard to say to your loved one, I'm really concerned, and I don't think me doing all of these things for you is going to help you if you can't even be in a calm place. You can't have those conversations with your loved one. So I think that family connections helped me to have compassion for them so that I could go ahead and come up to them and say, I know you're really struggling right now, and I know this is really difficult for you. So maybe what can I do to help you do the task that you need to do so that we can do it together on the first time. I think those things are gonna help you to be in a better place. What I did want to talk about is starting improving your relationship. What ends up happening, I think, when the relationships are so tattered is you have nothing in common anymore. You're so drained, you've had so many fights, you've had so many difficult situations, you don't like each other, you don't trust each other. So what I started to do in my own life was I heard my loved one talking about a show that they wanted to watch. And, they had heard about it, that it was a good, really exciting show. So I started watching it on my own. It wasn't a show that I ever would have been interested in, but I went ahead and started watching it, and then I brought it up one day. And so we ended up having a really great conversation about this show. It was nothing about me. It was nothing about them. So we were able to start talking about something. And when you start talking about something in a calm manner and it didn't turn into a fight, it makes that one little step, one little brick in the foundation that you're starting to build. And so there are things that we tried to start doing. So we started to, do this little hobby together, and we started to do, go on like just a quick jaunt to the store where, I just stayed in a great place, that I didn't react. And so those things are the ways that you start to build up the relationships, because when you have such emotion in your past, it comes back to that being present. You know, you're just ready for the fight. You're in a tense place. Your brow is furrowed. You know, it can be really difficult. Do you want to chime in?
No. So one thing that I think about when I think about these situations is that these are usually kind of chronic problems. So people get to this position not out of a day or a week or a few months even of a lot of emotional volatility and outbursts. So this is usually after years and years of frustration, doing the best you can, trying lots of different techniques, and also trying to be a good parent and trying to help your loved one, maybe trying to fix them, but trying to help them and trying to be a decent person. And you realize, this is my kid, my responsibility for better or worse, and I just got to suck it up and do it. But when people get fried to this point, I have my own thoughts on it, and I'm happy to share them, but I'll let you go first. I'm interested in your thoughts. How do you have a conversation with the loved one about your being fried and burned out and just unable to help?
It was very difficult at first. So this is where, you know, before I was blaming a lot. You know, well, if you didn't do this, I wouldn't act this way, et cetera. But finally I was able to come to a place that's saying, you know, I'm just doing the best that I can right now. You know, it may not be how you want me to handle the situation, so that, you know, I just want to help you, and I know that may be not what you want me to do, so, you know, what is it that would help you? And I was able to kind of come to a place for myself, like, this is really difficult for me. You know, I don't know how to do this, and I'm just learning, and I really kind of tried to turn it on myself versus the blaming. That was the first step that really helped me. Yeah. Was to not be so resentful. And when I was able to come from a place where it was really hard at first, because I think with someone with BPD, if I did say, you know, this is difficult for me, they would blow up and say, this isn't about you, this is about me. So that was a really hard place to start. But usually when I would say, you know, listen, I'm just learning, I'm just trying to do the best that I can, often it would calm them down.
Yeah. No, so I agree. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking is that I think it can be really helpful for parents to accept the fact that they cannot fix the problem. Mm-hmm. And then the communication concretely goes something like, exactly like you said, I'm not sure how to help you. I hope you know that I love you, because I really do, but we keep getting into these fights, or you keep trying to hurt yourself, and I'm getting overwhelmed and distraught and just burned out. Like it terrifies me to think that you are going to hurt yourself. Or I get so furious when you keep yelling at me and calling me names and being horrible to me. And I don't know what to do. And I'm willing to accept that I don't know how to help you. Mm-hmm. And if you have ideas about how I can be helpful, I'm happy to hear them. But if you want to get help from a professional, if the person's not in therapy, then maybe we could arrange that. I'll help you find somebody who might be able to help you. Mm-hmm. Or if you're already in treatment, I hope you can rely on that person to help you, because I can't save you. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, the reason that I point that message out, I can't save you, you have to save yourself, is as a clinician, I use that all the time, because so many people with borderline personality disorder really do feel very desperate. Mm-hmm. They feel unsavable, and they feel unworthy of being saved, but they desperately want to be loved, and they desperately want people to try to save them. And so they will often go to great lengths to try to rope people in to saving them, or to at least attempting to save them. And then when you fail to save them, they'll get mad at you. Mm-hmm. And you get that. And it's certainly not a leap to imagine most parents are desperately trying to save their children.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, And obviously, if you were able to save your child, she or he would have been saved, and it would have been done. And maybe some people are so lucky, and their child gets saved, and they move on. But people who wrote these questions, that hasn't been the case. The child hasn't been so easily saved and or fixed. And I think one of the most helpful things for me as a clinician when I work with people with borderline personality disorder is to transfer the responsibility of the saving onto the individual. Because if they're relying on me as their therapist or psychiatrist to save them with psychotherapy or with medication, it almost never works. I can say that to everybody loud and clear. It almost never works. The times that I've really seen people get better are when they accept at least partial responsibility for healing themselves. And because part of the responsibility is tolerating distress, owning your behaviors, good and bad behaviors, and taking responsibility for them. Doesn't mean they're going to be perfect, but they're going to at least going to attempt to get better and to develop a life that they want. And so, when I read these two people's questions, I suspect they're both in the business of trying to save their children, and it's very difficult to let go of that.
And I think you touched upon something too, is that we do often think that if they only did this, they're going to be fixed. And I know that's, if they only did this therapist or if they only got that, and I think it's letting go of that and accepting your loved one for who they are versus whether it's a child or a spouse or a sibling or something. That's a really difficult place to come to, is to accept that this may be my loved one and they're not going to be fixed. And I think by finally coming to that acceptance, it helped me to move forward. The other thing is the fear that you mentioned. The fear of them hurting themselves, the fear of all of that is very difficult, because you're so afraid, you're going to lose them or they're going to do something that's irreparable that holds you in that place where you may not be willing to confront them or to say those things. You're afraid to admit that you can't fix them, that they're going to fall apart. But I know actually in my own situation, now that you bring that up, that was a huge turning point for my loved one when we did come to that point, both as a therapist and myself, to say, we've done as much as we can. At this point, it's you need to do some of the hard work too, and that's a really tough place to be, to get them to.
It is. So it's a perfect segue because some people have asked about that, and I'll jump right to that question since we're kind of on the topic. So one person asked exactly that question. My son keeps telling me he wants to commit suicide. I told him I can't take it. How do you deal with the fact that your child might kill himself? I can take anything but that.
And I think, Dr. Palmer and I have talked about this, and it's something that comes up in family connections a lot. So I'm going to speak generically again because I think there are some of us that live in that fear and cannot get over that fear, so that they are constant. They're like, I cannot just accept it. Then there are those of us who have come to the acceptance that this may happen, because I think that it's letting go of that they're doing it to you. And I think that's really, whether they're cutting themselves, whether they're hurting themselves, whether they're taking drugs or alcohol or becoming suicidal, that it's like, how can you do that to us? How can you do that to our family? It's letting go that they're not doing it to the family or to you. This is something that they cannot tolerate anymore. They cannot tolerate these feelings. They cannot tolerate life. The future that they see themselves with not getting better, and that suicide may be the only way out. And so there are family members, there are those of us who just had to come to that acceptance that this may happen. And when we came to that acceptance, it was to the point where it was actually freeing. It would be devastating, and I'm not saying that it wouldn't be devastating to lose our loved one to suicide, but it was to the point where our lives were becoming so compromised, living in fear, taking the knives out of the house, hiding all the alcohol, not having any drugs, and not leaving our loved one alone, that it was so draining that we were losing ourselves instead. And so by accepting that, and this person who's writing in, it's not something we can tell you to do, or it's a place that you have to accept, or those, there are people that can't. But the ones that have accepted that this may happen and understand that it's not about them, it's a choice that their loved one makes, that it actually is very freeing, that you can put the knives back in, you can put you can live your life and understand. But what ended up happening with many of us is our loved one, so we said to our loved ones that, listen, I hope that you don't make that decision. I would be devastated if you make that decision, but I can't stop you. And so I'm going to be here for you, and I'm going to give you all the resources that you can to get help. If this therapist isn't working out, we'll find another therapist. But if you choose to make that decision, I can't stop you. And, but I also can't sit and listen on the phone right now with you continuing to talk about it. So I'm going to hang up, and I hope to hear from you tomorrow or the next day or in an hour. But I just can't do this anymore. And it can be a real turning point. But there are also those people who do. So it's really a place that you have to be comfortable in. And there are many people who aren't comfortable. There's many of us family members who aren't comfortable, and there's others that have let it go. But I think that the fear of them just cutting even, or alcohol. There's a couple in here about alcohol and drugs. It's that fear of always trying to control the situation so they don't do these things that is so draining. I don't know what you...
No, I think that's great. Let's move on, maybe to the next question.
Yep.
I'll go ahead and read it to you if you want.
Yep, go ahead.
So my wife has never been diagnosed, but I suspect she has BPD, and we get this question a lot. Change wife to daughter to mother to husband, son. When she drinks wine or is in need of food, she starts up a tape loop of historical events that have caused her pain. We've been together 42 years, and her rants usually focus on my family and the pain they caused her over the years. Even though I've apologized each time over the years, it's not good enough, and she continues on her rant until something distracts her. How should I respond when she starts up the tape loop I've heard for years? How can I get her to resolve this pain and accept my apologies? What should I say to her? It's like she gets possessed by an alien being.
And it is. It's an alien being. It's really that these emotional vampires, an alien being. It's so true. I think that what happens is it's really difficult to see your loved one go into this place, because when they are not in this place, they can be loving and happy and fun and funny and intelligent, and then this thing takes over, and it's really difficult. So again, going back to yourself, what can you do to help yourself to be in a better place to handle when these things happen? And I think the first thing in my own view is to stop apologizing, because it wasn't something, it sounds like, that you did. And I think sometimes the apologies don't help. It makes them feel invalidated, that they shouldn't have been treated this way, et cetera. I think sometimes just saying, going back to the validation, is that it must be really difficult to feel this way. I can't imagine how hurt you must feel, versus saying, I'm sorry that they did that to you. It doesn't sometimes help. I know it sounds like it should help, and theoretically it should help, and it may help for 94% of the population, but for that 6%, of on the emotionally sensitive spectrum, those apologies and those, constantly giving in and letting them rant about this stuff, it actually makes it worse. So I think the first thing is the validation, like, yes, this is really tough. I'm really sorry that this is happening. That's back to apology, sorry. That this must be really difficult to have my family had made you feel this way. But I think that the wine and the food is an important thing, because I think that it's usually when everything else it's usually not about the food or the wine or et cetera. What happens is when something else is usually starting to happen, and this is the final point. I know when my loved one is tired and hungry, that's usually when they're dysregulated, because it's that final little straw in a day of things that have happened. And so often, I don't know if you want to jump in here, I'm kind of losing it. I'm trying to think of how to put it. But I think the validation part, I think you being in a good place to say that, you know what, I can't change what's happened in the past, and I wish that I could. I just can't. So what can I do to help you get through this moment of feeling overwhelmed and, disrespected, I think, is really what it comes down to when they feel this way.
No, I think that's spot on. So the validation is really important, and it doesn't have to be agreeing with. It doesn't have to be putting your own family members under the bus if you really don't think that's fair or accurate. But you can at least let your wife know that I hear loud and clear that you felt mortally wounded by them, that you felt humiliated by it, that you felt whatever she felt by them. And you really need to say that over and over again and make sure she gets that loud and clear. But the other thing, after 42 years of marriage, if this is a common thing, I would encourage this person to assert him or herself, I guess, nowadays, with kind of the dilemma of, every now and then you go on these rants and I've tried to understand your feelings. I think I get it, but if there's something I'm not getting, please help me get it. We can't change the past, as you said. And then say, and I have to let you know, it really takes a toll on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really puts distance between us. And I think we could be a much better couple if I wasn't always on guard for these rants. And I don't know what you want from me. But what I'm asking for you is a way to move beyond these rants because they're really disruptive to us as a couple.
And I think the fear probably after 42 years is, divorce or this person. And it's really also the fear of these blow-ups that keep us from bringing up when they're in a good place. And I think that's an important thing that we learned in Family Connections is also when to bring up a difficult conversation. And a lot of times it isn't when they're drinking the wine or they're hungry or something else. So it's finding a time and a place. Often the challenge is you don't want to bring them up because you don't want to set them off, but sometimes those conversations can be much healthier and more effective when they're not in that place. So it is finding the confidence by taking care of yourself and being in a good place and making it calm and non-judgmental and learning those skills before you bring it up in a conversation, but bringing it up not when they're drinking or they're hungry or in that tough.
Absolutely. Very, very important point that I failed to mention. But so let's move on. So my brother-in-law with BPD has verbally attacked me on 2 occasions recently. Both times he was unmedicated. What do you suggest I do if this happens again? What can I do to prevent it from happening? I know it's the illness, not him, but I struggle to get his hurtful words out of my head.
The first thing definitely is that to understand, I think you're already showing compassion, in this conversation. You understand that it's mental illness. You also are looking at it that they're unmedicated, and you're also right away saying, I know it's not the illness, not him. This comes back to my previous point about not taking it personally. So it usually isn't about you. You're the person, maybe because you're calm and compassionate, that they feel safe in lashing out. But absolutely it's not okay for anybody to verbally lash us. And, it's getting to that point to have that conversations with our loved ones to say that this is not okay. Again, it's probably not right in that moment, but so maybe my suggestion is whether it's your brother-in-law, so it's either your sister's husband or some related, or if it's your spouse's sibling, to maybe have a talk with them and say, I just want to let you know that, it really hurts me when you say those things, and that the next time it happens, I'm just going to let you know I'm going to walk away. Or it's setting up those boundaries before it happens again. If you know that you said it's happened on 2 occasions, and if it went unchecked in those times, it's probably going to happen again. So I think it's, again, back to being calm, being compassionate, which I think this person already sounds like they're there, and not taking it personally would be the next advice, but also to have a conversation before it happens again to say, that really hurt me, and if it happens again, I'm probably going to have to walk away.
So let me ask a related question that somebody typed in, and this is from a teenager with a mother who has borderline personality disorder but doesn't think of herself as having the diagnosis. And she asked, how do you deal with a mom when you're still a teenager? I have younger siblings too, and they don't understand my mother's extreme yelling. I don't know how to set boundaries with her, how to protect my own emotional health without her being mad at me for being rude?
And this is a very, very difficult situation because a child of someone with mental illness is put in a reverse relationship, so I feel for you because you're the one that has to be the bigger person. You're the one who has to almost be the caretaker. So I'm so sorry that you're going through this, especially as a teenager and especially with younger siblings. I think that this comes back to some of the points I made, in my previous webinar, is that get some education, get some help yourself if you can talk to another adult, and that if you don't feel comfortable talking to your mother, maybe talking with an adult, with your mother. This is a really tough one to put you in in a tough place. But I think that, again, in a calm way, when your mom is not upset, to say, Mom, I really feel scared and hurt when these things happen. I love you, and I want us to be, have a good relationship. What can I do in these situations when you're feeling this way to help you? So versus accusatory, like you're doing this and you're making me feel this way, it's more putting it in a place from your perspective. But being a young teen, or how old did they say they were? Or just a child?
She or he didn't say.
Yeah, so I think it is important to get some help and support because that is a really, really tough situation. I don't know what else you want to add.
No, I would reinforce get help from a responsible, helpful adult. And that can be from lots of places. So if you're in school as a teenager, if it's an older teenager, maybe you've finished high school and you're no longer in school. But if you are in school, there are guidance counselors who can be helpful. If you're at college even, there are usually counseling centers. Certainly if you have younger siblings, they're probably in school. So I think school can be a place to start. And let them know that you don't even want a confrontation at first. You're just looking for advice and support and guidance on how to better manage your relationship with a mom who yells a lot and can be really difficult. If school doesn't seem like a safe place, if people who are involved in religious organizations, ministers, pastors, others, sometimes people have a neighbor, sometimes people have an aunt or an uncle.
I was going to say another family member can be really helpful.
So, I mean, there are a lot of adults around, and I think you need to choose carefully, like who you trust, and who you trust to not go running to your mom and telling her, your daughter just
You're doing this
complained to me.
Because I think that's whether it's your mom or other people that are listening, any loved one, I think sometimes the confrontation, or what's the word, the intervention or something that they may do, people with BPD already feel threatened, they already feel insecure, and so it has to come from a loving, compassionate place. So you don't want to talk to someone or have someone intervene who's going to end up attacking this person. You want someone who's going to be compassionate towards your mom as well.
Yeah.
But I think that your younger siblings, I mentioned this in the previous webinar, that we often try to hide things from them, but they are very observant. They know that something's going on. So, whatever you can do to educate your younger siblings too, use the emotional seizure, whatever it is that you can teach them that this is not mom. Mom's brain is misfiring right now, so that they also can help not take it so personally and to try to stay calm themselves.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, the reason I say find an adult that you can talk to is because there's a lot of education in these webinars, and certainly our whole website has a lot of webinars that can be really helpful with specific strategies and tools, but this is not a one-stop quick fix thing. If your mom has borderline personality disorder and doesn't even get treatment for it, this is going to be an ongoing, lifelong, potentially, problem, and you're going to need support and tools, and it really can become frustrating, and especially if you're younger and more vulnerable, it can be really helpful to have a steady, helpful adult in your life.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's maybe move on.
Yep.
So can you please address boundaries when there's an adult child living at home? How do you set expectations when you've enabled them in the past? And how do you nudge them out of the nest when they have no money or job? and how long and to what extent do you monetarily help your adult child with BPD? Is there ever a good time to suggest they apply for disability?
This is probably the biggest challenge we have as parents of people with BPD. But we've even had people in Family Connections that were responsible for their siblings and certainly, spouses. So I think it can come across in any situation where the family members think that when we talk in here, obviously you probably understand, when we talk about family members in this webinar, it's more about ourselves and we refer to the person with BPD as our loved one. So when our loved one, is not doing as much as we think they should be doing, that's where a lot of the resentment and kind of difficult situations have had. So I think the first thing is to accept that, again, they're doing the best they can at that moment. Doesn't mean that things that can improve, but it's also losing that judgment so that you can come from a compassionate place when you're going to talk to your loved one. I think that these situations often need professional help. We had, in my own life and people that I have been so close to in these support groups, et cetera, this is a very common problem. And so I think the first thing is to be able to have these conversations to say, that it's really difficult for me to make dinner and bring it up to your room and then go and collect the, when you say enabling, so I'm assuming that there are things, you're doing laundry, you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're doing all those things, and that I know these things are difficult for you. So when you can come from that place versus like, I'm tired of cleaning up after you, you need to step up around here. All those things are just going to escalate their emotions, which the conversations are not going to be effective. But if you can put it from a place for yourself, like, listen, I'm really having a hard time. I could really use the help. I know this is difficult for you, and you start in baby steps, that I'm going to make dinner and I'll let you know when it's ready and your plate will be here on the counter. It's little small steps like that, and when they do it successfully, it can make a huge change. They get a little more confident, and then you may see them bring the dishes back down versus you having to ask them. So a lot of times it's coming from a compassionate place. It's starting, with baby steps, especially if you've enabled someone to the point where they're dependent on you. And I think the monetary thing is a huge issue because I think that, we're just, you're saving for retirement, or you want to start doing things yourself. You've worked hard. You want to be in a place where you can enjoy the fruits of your labor, and you have this adult child with you that is depending on you emotionally and financially. So I think it's back to that accepting that this is the way it is. If they had cancer or a physical deformity or something, would you be so judgmental? Probably not. But this is something that is so personal because you may not be able to afford to have them, dependent on you. And if that's the case, absolutely, again, in a compassionate way that, geez, I read that, people with mental illness are also able to get disability. Geez, I think that may be something we should look into versus I can't, do this anymore. You need to figure out how to get some money. You can hopefully see the difference in the way that you handle those conversations. Do you have any?
Nope, I think that's good. Let's move on because I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing
I know we are. Yep.
It's flying by.
My son's unpredictable behavior has had a negative impact on his relationship with his two siblings. They get tired of having to sidestep his moods and emotional turmoil. Can you offer any advice on this? This is a huge one, and siblings are part of our Family Connections group for this very reason. They can, it's another situation where they are supposed to have equal attention from the parents, and they're supposed to be on an equal level with each other. So all of a sudden you have this person who's, the negativity, the outbursts, etc. Everyone goes scurrying for their rooms. They want to hide, or get out of the house or something, and they become very resentful towards that sibling. So I think the first thing is that is to educate your sibling, your other children as well, on what BPD is, what emotional sensitivity means, how their brain works, and that it isn't directly, again, not to take it so personally themselves. I think that this is a really hard. I mean, I got therapy for my other child for this very reason. It was, they had some resentment towards the sibling, and that was very helpful for them to understand their sibling a little bit better. And when they, again, if they can adopt the same attitudes that we do, that to stay calm, to stay compassionate, and say, versus like, hey, what's your problem? Why are you always doing this? Can't you see mom's upset? Versus saying like, hey, I can see you're having a hard time. Can I help in any way? Why don't we go for a walk? I mean, my sibling, my other child totally stepped up to the situation when we involved him versus trying to protect him.
Well, could you speak a little bit to, it's very much related to this, and we have a question on this, but what about when the anger outbursts or the emotional outbursts are directed toward you as a family member? And so the specific question is, I have a lot of trouble getting along with my mother. I'm pretty sure she has some kind of personality disorder, maybe narcissistic, maybe BPD. However, she won't admit to it. In family therapy, so they're getting family therapy, and then in family therapy, she paints herself as a victim and always seems to get sympathy from the female therapist. And then that leaves me feeling kind of helpless, and how can I continue to maintain my identity and move on with my life given this scenario?
I think sometimes you have to separate the therapy too, because I think what happens is it's how different perspectives. So, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen or this is happening, but sometimes what you may see as sympathy may just be validation from the therapist, and so maybe they're not agreeing with your sibling, but maybe they're just trying to bring the emotion down so that you can have the conversation. But I have to say there are good therapists and there are not so good therapists, so that if you and the rest of your family also feel that the therapy isn't effective, it may be time to get different therapy if they really are only catering to the person who's having trouble. But the therapist may truly just be trying to understand it from their perspective. Yes, I'm so sorry. It sounds like your feelings were really hurt. Doesn't mean that you were doing anything intentionally, but they're just trying to let that person feel heard so that they can have an effective conversation. When it's directed at you, it's really, really tough. I think that, again, learning these skills are able make you able to have a conversation. So my one child had a conversation with my child with BPD, saying, listen, I'm just here to be helpful and supportive, but when you talk to this way to me, I can't do it. So sometimes letting them work it out between themselves versus the parent. This is not the parent, but sometimes parents will step in. Oh no, don't say that to them. Sometimes life does school the person with BPD better than the family member can.
Yeah, no, and that's another example of kind of setting limits with people with BPD. Even though you want to be compassionate and understand they have an illness and they're not always in control of their emotions, and it must be horrible to be them, people also in their life have to set limits around behaviors and things that they're willing to tolerate and things that they're not willing to tolerate. And it doesn't mean abandonment. It doesn't mean you either do this or else I'm out of here. It can be, if you do this, I'm leaving, or I'm hanging up, or whatever, and then I'll be back the next day. But I really can't take much more of these rants or these accusations or whatever.
I wanted to jump to should I, because I think we last one.
Sure, yeah, got time for maybe one more.
Should I tell my 40-year-old with BPD, it's on 14, I think, with BPD that I don't approve of his drinking and doing drugs whenever I see him, or should I just let it go and continue my relationship with him and not bring it up? If I bring it up, I know he will protest and accuse me of trying to control him. He can become verbally abusive if he is confronted. And I wanted to address this because this is a huge thing that we see in Family Connections and the support groups that I've been a part of, is that in Family Connections we learn to separate what our needs are from what their needs are, and what our actions and what our values are from what their values are. And I think that the quick answer to this is no, you shouldn't say every time you see them that I don't approve of you drinking. I think what happens is that you want to put yourself in a better relationship with your loved one so that they can come to you when they do want help. Because there's nothing that you can do to stop them from drinking or doing drugs and I think it's really, if you bring it up and you constantly, put them down and be judgmental about it, they're not going to talk to you when they do want help. Everybody's judgment about marijuana is different. Some families have no problem with their loved one doing it. Other people have a huge thing, and I think you have to just respect your values. If you don't want them drinking in your house or the drugs in your house, that's absolutely a line you can draw. I understand you'd like to drink or you want to go out and smoke pot, but you're not allowed to do it in this house, is separate from saying you can't do that anymore, and you can't, I don't approve of that, and I can't believe that you're doing that with your illness, et cetera, et cetera. I think you're going to lose the relationship. I don't know what your feeling is on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's right. And again, it's about acceptance. Mm-hmm. That you can't fix them, you can't change them. You can express a desire for an outcome. I'd like to see you happy and healthy, and I just have to share with you that when I see you drinking and drugging, that you don't seem happy and healthy, or mm-hmm. you're not accomplishing the goals that you talk about wanting in your life. And you can share those reflections from time to time, but assuming that your bringing this up is going to change the person is probably futile. Mm-hmm. And again, it wasn't a bad idea to start with that mm-hmm. a few times, mm-hmm. because sometimes it works.
Right.
And for the people it works for, they don't write in questions, and they're not usually watching these webinars because they have a conversation, don't drink and don't do drugs, and the kids do it, and then everybody lives happily ever after. But in this case, when your 40-year-old son is still doing it, you probably told him countless times, and he's still doing it, and that approach clearly isn't working. And so getting to a point of acceptance that you can't change that, and that he's going to have to step up and accept responsibility for his life at some point.
But I think that if, my just personal suggestion from personal experience from myself and others is that it's waiting to have that conversation while you have a few good conversations. Because I think what happens is if you're always bringing it up, they come to the home, they come to the telephone, already defensive, waiting for you just to say it, and then it's a blow up. See, why do you always have to bring it up? So I think if you can just have a few conversations without something before you bring it up, and then, when you're in a better place, and then they'll maybe listen to you when you can say, and especially, I love the way that you put that, it's very compassionate. I just see these things and I worry about you, but, those are your choices that you can make. I just worry about you is a lot different than you shouldn't be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. No, great. So unfortunately we are out of time and we have a lot more questions. So clearly this is a topic that's hitting a nerve for a lot of people, and mm-hmm. I hope was really helpful for them. Before we go, I want to let people know our next webinar is a couple weeks from now, Thursday, September 7th. We're going to have prospectively 2 individuals affected by borderline personality disorder, and they are going to share their story about participating in the Deconstructing Stigma campaign the McLean Hospital has offered, where they are very public about their illness, and we'll have a conversation with them about what it's like to have borderline personality disorder, and people can get a perspective from people who are willing to be open and upfront, and they're not your family member, so it might be a little easier to have the conversation with someone else.
It is really nice to, I've gone to panels where people with BPD will speak, and again, it's always very interesting to hear from their perspective. And I said it in the last webinar, and I actually did get a few emails and things. I am willing to talk to someone either by email or by phone if you are really having a tough time. I've been there, done that. I'm happy, just send an email saying I'd love to connect, and I'll be happy to talk with you.